Morning all. All right, so starting things off with, yes, the first of the season previews. I provide you with the season preview for the Detroit Red Wings. I thought, why not start with Detroit? Actually, there is a reason, and it's a practical one why I'm starting with Detroit, but practical on my side. So anyways, the Detroit Red Wings are coming off of a season where they finished 35, 37, and 10. The disappointment with the Red Wings for some Wings fans was that they sold at the deadline. There was a belief that they weren't that far out, and maybe with the right moves, they could make the playoffs. Steve Yzerman felt that the big picture was more of what was important, and that selling off the right guys, making the right moves at the deadline in order to look for the future was where it was at. So the team finished with 2.89 goals scored per game and 3.35 goals allowed per game. Those numbers are skewed slightly by the fact that their record tanked after that trade deadline was done and the moves were made. Because obviously for the players in the locker room, they know, all right, so we're not all in on the playoffs. It would be difficult for a coach to really motivate the players against teams that are more motivated, right? Teams coming in that have a shot at the playoffs or above the playoff line and looking at their seeding. So I don't read too much into the record or their goals for and against coming into this season. I don't think that carries over. But the power play and penalty kill numbers, the power play 21.1%, not bad. They're going to want to improve that penalty kill, 78.3%. And again, you have a team that's below the playoff line. Odds are there's going to be weaknesses around that lineup. So a bad penalty kill from last year, not a big deal. They'll be looking to improve that this year with some of the additions that they've made. Now, for Wings fans, the amount of basically urgency to make the playoffs going up makes sense. The last time this team made the playoffs was 2016. So this will be 8 years this coming spring. And so the idea that, hey, beyond 8 years, that's a little more than your normal rebuild. I'm not sure if it is. I feel like with 32 teams in the league and with the way that the league's structured, and especially if you do that full teardown, I think it's harder to make it back to the playoffs, and that, an 8-year turnaround, that may end up being the standard, but we'll see. So the last time they won a round was 2013. The last time they won the Stanley Cup was 2008. Of course, they made it to the final in 2009. They lost that rematch against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So there's been a lot of success with the Detroit Red Wings throughout their entirety, but they've had their droughts as well. And I remember when I started watching hockey in the early 80s, it wasn't exactly their proudest time, but they got back to being one of the better teams in the league. And of course, in the 90s, the winning became pretty commonplace and eventually translated to the playoffs. Now, their cap space, $5,981,527, according to Cap Friendly. Joe Veleno, as I'm recording this, is still a restricted free agent. One of the reasons that I delayed the season previews until now is very much because I felt like there were a lot of moves still to be made. Now it feels like it's less likely there's going to be moves to be made with us less than a month away from training camp. So their top 5 scorers from this past season, including a player or two who may not be on the roster anymore. It's actually one player. But Dylan Larkin led them in scoring. 80 games, 32 goals, 47 assists, 79 points. Larkin's a very good player. He is their leader. I also have him listed as the MVP in this corner, meaning without him, they're in trouble. He is the leader on the ice, kind of the leader off the ice, and I think he's grown into becoming one of the... I don't know how you rank captains, but I think he gets better every year he has that experience as a captain. David Perron, 82 games, 24 goals, 32 assists, 56 points. We may see a drop in Perron's point totals. He is at an older age for an NHL player, and so that drop-off in production may occur this year. Dominic Kubalik, who is one of the exits off this roster, 81 games, 20 goals, 25 assists, 45 points. I think Kubalik played well, but the thing is, of course, in any trade that you're going to get a marquee player, you're going to have to give up a decent player, and Kubalik was that sacrifice. Raymond had a bit of a down year from his previous season, 74 games, 17 goals, 28 assists, 45 points. I could see Raymond hitting 60 points this year. I could see him getting a little bit more than that as well. I think he's a very good player, just sophomore jinx is a thing. Andrew Kopp, I thought recovered well from a slow start. 82 games, 9 goals, 33 assists, 42 points. And with the additions made in the offseason, Kopp may be a little more comfortable this year than he was the season previous. And we may see his ice time drop, but we may not see his points totals drop. That would be my prediction with Kopp. And then you've got Seider, who had a season with Sherratt. Then he had a season with Wallman. and it was quite different between the two. So Seider, 82 games, 5 goals, 37 assists, 42 points. This is a big year for Seider. I wouldn't be surprised to see him end up with 60 points this year either. And then the goaltending. The goaltending was quite the question mark with Detroit. I would argue it still kind of is. Husso, 56 games last season, 26, 22, and 7 record, 896 save percentage. I don't think Husso's a bad goaltender. I've seen the comments about how you're not going to win anything with Husso. I thought, again, when we look at the numbers and how they suffered after the trade deadline, I thought Husso's did as well. That before the trade deadline, Husso's numbers weren't fantastic, but they weren't bad. And then after the trade deadline, everything tanked, including his numbers. Nedeljkovic played 15 games, 5-7-2 record, 895 save percentage. He has exited the team. Hellberg, the same, 17 games, 4-8-1 record for him, 885 save percentage. It was just nice to see Magnus Hellberg get some games in, though. So their goaltending will look quite different this coming season. Now, how does the channel feel about the Detroit Red Wings? 2% of the vote went towards first or second place, 25% third or fourth. So a quarter of the vote believes Detroit's going to be significantly better than last year, or that the Atlantic Division will weaken. Fifth or sixth, 60% of the vote had them fifth or sixth, so that is the majority, of course. And 13% felt, well, the rebuild's not done, and had them seventh or eighth. Although I would say 73% with fifth or below that. That might be a bit of a depressing stat for Detroit fans, but again, we didn't see New Jersey coming when they did. Is Detroit the next New Jersey? We'll find out this year. Their hits leader was Moritz Seider with 207. Their block shots leader was also Seider, 190. So he did a little bit of everything, played a ton of time on the ice, and is really coming into his own. Posts. So if you're looking for the most snake bit player in the Detroit organization, it was Dylan Larkin. Had 10 posts this past season. So with 32 goals, 10 posts, a little bit more accuracy. Maybe he pushes more towards 40 goals this coming season. So when we look at additions and exits, it's a long list, right? So we'll look at the exits first. So Lindstrom got traded out very, very recently, right? He ends up being traded to the Montreal Canadiens. And I like him defensively. I know the offense isn't there, but defensively, I think there's some good play. Kubalik, as mentioned before, was sacrificed to make the team better. Suter, of course, leaves. He goes to Vancouver. Ernie, Osterley, Haig, sorry. I'll just say I'm overtired, even though I'm not. Had a good night's sleep. Zadina also left the team. They didn't decide to keep him around. And what I like with this is that they terminate the contract, and he's gone off to try to, prove them wrong. And we'll see if Zadina does. Nedeljkovic, Hellberg, as mentioned previous, they're off the team. Chason is gone as well. Chason, a player that I would love to see catch on with the tryout this year. I like Chason's spirit. Anyways, the additions, some excitement here over DeBrincat, right? So DeBrincat, coming off of a year in Ottawa where his goal scoring wasn't where I think he would have wanted it to be. I don't think it's where Ottawa would have wanted it to be. Probably caused them to, maybe they lowballed him a little bit when it came to negotiations early on, but at any rate, he wasn't staying in Ottawa. He has signed a contract extension with Detroit. Detroit and their fans will be looking for DeBrincat to get back to the 40-goal form he enjoyed in Chicago. So the question mark with DeBrincat is simple. The 40-goal seasons, was it a measure of DeBrincat's goal scoring, or was it Patrick Kane setting him up? Right? Like, was this a really good goal scorer, or a guy who was just on fire, had that perfect chemistry with Patrick Kane? Can they recreate that in Detroit? Clem Costin added from Edmonton. Solid bottom six forward. Comfer added from Colorado. He can play second line. He can play third line. He is a very useful player. Can play various spots around the lineup. Sprong, I think, is underrated. I'm kind of surprised that Sprong's bounced around as much as he has. But, hey, the odds are usually when you see that, a guy who scores goals and he bounces around a bit, it usually means the defensive game makes either coaches, GMs, or just the statistics department nervous. Christian Fischer added. And again, I think some good solid depth. Gostisbehere will provide that on the blue line. Hall, for all of the criticism of Hall's contract, this is a team that has the cap space to afford that Hall contract. The cap is supposed to go up next summer, and so I don't think it's going to hurt them. They've picked up Petrie as well. Adding Petrie, Hall, Gostisbehere on that blue line will improve the totals for a guy like Seider, right? So You're going to have that support on the blue line. You're going to have a deep blue line. That's for the best. And Reimer should take over as the backup goaltender. Should be a more stable influence in the backup spot than Nedeljkovic or Hellberg were this past season. There are some question marks with Reimer coming off of what was an up and down year in San Jose. But it was San Jose, right? So the next one, with the moves made on the blue line, Edvinsson probably starts the season in the AHL. And I say probably because very often you're going to have injuries on the blue line. This is why when people scratch their heads and ask, why would a GM want 8 NHL-level defensemen? Because of injury. You want to make sure that you're insulated from injuries so that when 1 or 2 defensemen go down, the guys who are stepping in, you have faith in, and they know the NHL game. Casper, I've got in here as well. If Casper can get into a spot, same thing, right? If there's an injury up front where they need a guy who can score and generate offense, bringing in Casper and using him might be the best option. And I'm sure they'll get good looks during the preseason, and we'll see where they're at. The sleeper for me, and I thought, well, why not throw fantasy sleeper on the board? I'm picking Berggren. I think that Berggren has tremendous talent, good two-way forward. Berggren can do a little bit of everything. He can play up and down the lineup. And I think he's been solid since coming into the Detroit organization as a prospect and working his way up. And when he's got those chances with the Detroit Red Wings, I think he's done well. As mentioned before, I have Larkin as the MVP of this team. One thing to watch with their schedule, which may favor them, 8 of their 12 games in November are at home. So if they can be really good at home, November could be key. And I believe 5 out of 9 in October are at home as well. So the schedule is favorable to Detroit the first month and a half of the season, and getting off to a good start can be key. Now, looking at this team and looking at the bigger picture too, 6th through 8th in the division, that's where they've finished the last 5 seasons. So if you voted for them to finish 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th, that's going to influence it, right? You're going to look at their numbers and say, well, they've been in this spot for a while. I don't know if these additions make them that much better. They've been below 500 for the last 7 seasons. So this is something they need to fix. They need to at least record a winning record. This is a season that's important for Red Wing fans, not just to see a little bit of progression, but to see a lot. So if this team misses the playoffs, but it's only by a few points, I think Wings fans will be okay with that. But if this team ends up finishing with 80 points again this year, questions will be asked. One interesting thing about Steve Yzerman. So I keep seeing posts about the Yzer plan and who does or doesn't believe in it. Now remember, he took over with the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2010. The Tampa Bay Lightning were in a bit of a different place than the Detroit Red Wings. The pressure in Tampa Bay, a little different than in Detroit. And of course, a lot of the key pieces that he needed were added soon after that, right? But Tampa Bay didn't win a couple of back-to-back Stanley Cups until Yzerman had actually left. It took a long time for them to get there. And he's been in charge in Detroit since 2019. So I understand the frustration with the Yzer plan for some, but honestly, it feels like it's still just, it's not necessarily infancy, but maybe it's a teenager right now. This whole plan, it's going through its awkward teenage phase. Its voice cracks a little bit, but you can see the potential there, what this team might be able to do when it's fully matured, right? So they've had 11 Stanley Cups all time, which again means that your fans are going to be like, hey, we build the Stanley Cups, we don't build the playoffs. I would agree with that assessment. The all-time wins leader in this franchise, Terry Sawchuk with 350. To me, that kind of epitomizes what I've talked about before. I don't talk about Sawchuk. I didn't watch Sawchuk play. So a lot of the time when we talk about past generations and current, it can get kind of tricky when you talk about players you haven't watched play. And for me, Sawchuk might be one that I regret not getting to see play, just in that he retired before I was watching hockey. So they've had top 10 picks in their last 7 drafts. This is part of the reason why fans would look and go, okay, so now's the time you've got to make that step and not be drafting in the top 10 again. And this is year 2 for Derek Lalonde. So Derek Lalonde had a bit of a trial by fire after the trade deadline was done. And this season, we'll see whether or not they get off to that good start. A good start is key, very much key. You look at New Jersey, what they did last season, what they were able to get done, and it starts with a fast start. It starts with catching teams off guard and riding that momentum. Can the Detroit Red Wings do that? So that's my question to you, fine people of the internet. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.